All right, welcome everybody. We're just going to take a second to file in. I have a short introduction and then we'll be getting started with the event. Thank you everyone for virtually attending tonight. I'm Gracie, I'm the events coordinator for print. A few little things just before we get started. If you have questions during the event, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is on the bottom right, or in the question and answer function, which is on the bottom bar of the main screen. If you'd like a copy of tonight's book, I'll include the link to the print page in the chat box so you can click right on through. We do have signed copies, so I'll send you to that page. I'd like to start by thanking the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance for their partnership on this event. They're an invaluable organization for the promotion of literature in Maine, and we've been so fortunate to work with them on a number of events, both pre and during pandemic, and hopefully post-pandemic once we get there. They are a member-based organization, so I'll include their page as well if you're interested in becoming a member, checking out their workshops and events. So this is the part where I usually go on to introduce tonight's speakers, which I of course will, but I wanted to take a quick moment to talk about what this book has meant for me. I used to work for a literary agent, and when she brought the manuscript in for Superhost, we were both completely enamored. It was shortly after that I actually decided to move to Maine, and Kate was the one to introduce me to Emily and print. It's not often you get to see a book's journey from start to finish, and even rarer that the book brings you into contact with such fantastic people and places. So I feel that I owe a lot to what is already a spectacular novel, but that's enough mushiness for now, and now we can get on to the speakers. Kate Russo's debut novel, Superhost, was published today. By Putnam, part of Penguin Random House. She has an MFA in painting from the Slade School of Fine Art and exhibits widely in the United States and England. Emily Russo is the co-owner of Print a Bookstore. She began her bookselling career in 2007 at the Odyssey Bookshop in South Hadley, Mass. In 2011, she took a job at Greenlight Bookstore to help launch their first editions club program and assist in running their event series. In 2015, she moved back to Maine to pursue her dream of opening her own bookstore. And in November 2016, together with Kirstie, she opened Print, where we virtually are now. Close your eyes and picture it. So please join me in virtually welcoming Kate and Emily.
Hey, sis.
Oh wait, we're drinking.
We're drinking. Yes, cheers to a long-awaited launch. I'm still so sad that we're not in the store, but due to the pandemic, this pub date has been a moving target. It was originally scheduled for June of last year and then got bumped, I don't know, forwards and backs. It feels like, every day we had a new pub date, but it's finally here. So congratulations. If anybody else in the audience has a glass, raise it and cheers. Congratulations.
Yay.
Yay. All right, well, we'll get started with some actual questions. I don't want to spend a ton of time on the plot because it came out today, and obviously we want everybody to have a chance to read the book, but Superhost actually does have a very fun origin story. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for
Superhost. Well, I was a Superhost. that is the shortest answer to that question, but obviously I'll give you all more. But before I started writing this book, I've always sort of written, and it's something that I guess in my family you don't take lightly if you decide you want to do that. So I've been doing it in secret for a long time. But when we had this family home that my parents couldn't shift, and it was in a coastal town. And we just decided, let's put it on Airbnb. And I sort of said, oh, I can do that. It'll be easy. It'll be great. I'll run it. And it ended up, it wasn't all, it's so much more work than you could ever possibly anticipate it being. You're basically running a hotel. But in the process of doing it, I just kept thinking this is number one, rife for all manner of, comic moments, in terms of my relationships with the guests, in terms of what they would leave behind in the house. And I just sort of thought, well, what other kind of artist can I put in this situation? And at the same time, I was exhibiting, but I wasn't exhibiting a lot. and I was feeling in a real rut with my painting. So that's that, you know, as Gracie said, that's my, you know, that's my origin. That's my MFA is painting, not writing. So I thought, well, you know, I mean, what other kind of art? I mean, so many artists are doing this type of work, this type of gig work, and so I just sort of came up with Bennett, and that a lot of that was about wanting to put a man in the situation that I was in. And you know, so I feel bad that he kind of was born out of sort of out of spite, but I ended up falling in love with him very quickly, so that I got rid of that pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, I sort of became obsessed with my Airbnb reviews, instead of or my lack thereof art reviews, and I think that's kind of must be a natural thing that happens, because we're all, you know, in this day and age looking for praise, looking for validation, you know, in the same way we do on Instagram and Facebook. And Airbnb kind of operates in a similar level, you know. When you get that little medal next to your picture that says you're a superhost, you're like,
I've arrived.
There's something special about me. Yeah, and I got really into it.
So you've kind of answered my next question, but we can expand a little bit more. And I do want to spend most of the night talking about the women of Superhost, because they are the ones who are most special, I think, to both you and myself. But we can touch on Bennett a little bit. And you know, as you mentioned, you were before you became a writer, you were an artist in terms of painting and drawing. So you've been a woman in the art world for now almost 20 years.
Yep.
So what made you decide, being a woman who's been in the art world and dealing with being a woman in the art world, which I'm sure can't have been easy at times, why did you choose to write your protagonist, or one of your protagonists, as a male?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I wanted to do is I knew that I wanted Bennett to be the kind of artist that had sort of squandered his fame. And I didn't feel like I could really do that with a female character. That seemed like it needed to be needed to be done through a male character. And particularly, I knew that I wanted him to have been painting the figure for a long time. So that's two things that were very different from me. Number one, I'm a very abstract artist, and number two, I've never, although I exhibit, and I've had some success in my career as a painter, I've never been a big household name, and that's one of the things that most in the art world, let's face it, 85% of your household name artists are men. So, yeah. and I wanted him to have that fame. I wanted people to know who he was. And that's something that we don't really actually have here much in the United States. I mean, there aren't that many living artists here that we can all sort of name.
Right.
But in the UK, it's a different story. There are artists that most people have a familiarity with.
Oh, interesting.
So the idea is that Bennett was kind of one of those in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay.
And so this is kind of this is a definite fall from grace for him in this position, and he's kind of squandered that. And the book is sort of really about him figuring out how and why.
Great. All right, so let's move on to the women. There are four main characters, four main women in Superhost, and I feel like we could talk for hours about all of them. And you're now our captive audience, so we're gonna make you listen to us for the next 3 hours talk about all of these women. No, we won't. But I certainly have, if not my favorite, the one that I think I resonate with the most. I think you do as well. And then there are two more, which we will also talk about. I guess let's just jump in. I'm not even sure I necessarily have a specific question. They're all four women who or three of them have rented this house, and they're all looking to recapture something. There's something's missing. They're going back to something. They're trying to figure something out. So the one that I most resonated with was Alicia, and the first woman to rent the house on AirBed from Bennett, and she's a young woman who is, I guess, kind of disenchanted with her post-collegiate, postgraduate life, and she has spent a year in London at the London School of Economics.
Yes.
And life just hasn't turned out for her, I guess, the way she kind of wants it. She wants to go back. She wants to capture that year, get that time back. And I guess my question is, how dare you? I felt like you wrote about me, and it was very unnerving, and no. But no, I really loved Alicia. So let's talk about her a little bit, because I did feel very close to her. I also spent a year abroad in Norwich, and it was probably one of the most formative years of my life. I would give anything to go back, and Alicia's in that same position. She would give anything to go back and recapture that year.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think one of the things that I did that I didn't realize I was doing until long after, was that I think that Alicia and Emma and Kirsty, who we'll talk about later, sort of all are kind of represent a certain time in a woman's life, you know. And, you know, and Alicia being the youngest, and then Emma, and then Kirsty being quite a bit older. And so Kirsty, for a lot of reasons, took more imagination, because I wasn't working so much from my own experience. But with Alicia and Emma, I certainly was. And it's funny that you relate to Alicia that much, because, you know, I really wasn't thinking about that.
No. I knew you weren't, but I did. She is, it's like, oh God, this is me on the page.
Yeah, but I sort of had a similar reaction when I left the UK. So I was there. I studied abroad there, weirdly, my freshman year of college and my junior year of college.
Right.
When I came back for my senior year of college, all I could think about was going back to the UK. And then I stayed another year in the States before ultimately moving over to London for my MFA, where I stayed there for 5 years. But I really wanted to capture with Alicia some of that feeling of not, I'm not even sure, and I think she realizes this in her chapter, that even once she's returned, she realizes she's made just a grave mistake.
Yeah.
At being there, and that whole kind of idea that you can't go home again. And I think she remembers this time. She wants to recapture it. She thinks it's going to solve all of her problems. But her ultimate problem is that she's kind of nowhere, in the sense that she doesn't have any friends really back home. And part of the reason for that is that none of them live up to this image of London in her mind. And so I don't think she quite understands that if she could live in the present with the people that she's with, she might have closer friendships with them.
Yeah.
And so she goes off to London, thinking she can recapture some of that. And of course she realizes that everybody that she knew in London has moved on.
Yeah.
And she's there on her own. And so what do you do with that? And she has a moment, you know, where she's really relying on social media, and she's trying, at the same time, she's trying to get in touch with the people back in the States and the people that she knew in London, and neither group is responding to her. And that's because she can't really commit herself to anything.
Yeah. And I think that's something, I'm just older than millennial, but I think that is, you know, maybe something our generation, you know, struggles with. And I don't know if that's a product of social media or not, but I've certainly felt that way before. You know, I can't be in the moment. It's either looking forward to something that I'm looking forward to, something in my life that I'm excited about, or gosh, I wish I could be back in that year. I would give anything to, you know, to relive that year again. I joke with Steve that if I got an offer to, somebody gave me a house in outside of Norwich, I'd pack up the family and move right now.
Yeah.
You know, Josh, give me $5. The store's yours. Bye. Peace. You know, I'm gone.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the way. I mean, that's the way we are really every time we go to London. And I think that London's that kind of city as well, where you sort of feel a natural nostalgia for it. Every time you're there, you're kind of remembering fondly the last time you were there.
Yeah.
And so I have that I go every year. I try to, not this year, but I try
Yeah.
to spend a couple months every year there, and it always sort of feels like you're trying to recapture something that you love about London. And it's kind of, you're in a nostalgic loop in that city. And I really wanted to give Alicia that feeling of she can't get it back.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to Emma, who I know is very dear to your heart. So Emma's gone with her husband. Her in-laws, one of her in-laws is ill, or no, it's her brother-in-law who is ill. But Emma suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder, which is something that you a little bit more than me, but something that both of us have been diagnosed with, and that our grandmother was lived with for her entire life and was never diagnosed with, and unfortunately passed it on to us. So I remember Mom at one point, I think it was Mom, maybe it was Dad, or maybe it was both of them, reading Emma's chapter and saying, I don't think I really understood what you girls, or what you, Kate, go through dealing with OCD as clearly as when I read Emma's chapter. So let's talk a little bit about Emma and what she does in her piece in the book, and what she's dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to give Emma quite a bit of my personality, and it was so much. It was so much fun to play with it, because when you're in the moment of anxiety, and so many of us suffer from anxiety now. I mean, it's impossible not to. But I wanted to explore it as humorously as I could, while also trying to get at the heart of the pain of it, and the suffering of it, because but she's also an artist, and so we share these two things in common, and she's much more like me as an artist than Bennett is. So the work that she makes drawings based on Philip Glass, and which is something I would totally do. Like, I gave her this, and she should be thankful, because I would have done it myself.
Yeah.
And she becomes so her brother-in-law is ill, and he is suffering from an opioid addiction, and she can't stop kind of comparing herself to him, and the sort of obsessive natures that they share. But where the humor comes into it is how she deals with Bennett, and how she believes that he is spying.
Avocados, man.
And I won't tell you guys whether or not he's spying on her. You can read the book and figure it out. But she's absolutely obsessed that he is spying on her, and that he has touched her avocado. And I think every person who has anxiety and has obsessive compulsive disorder has different things that they can't abide by. And so I'm more of an avoidance kind of obsessive. I don't have a lot of what you would call compulsions in terms of washing hands and all the things that we all sort of stereotypically think of as being OCD. But I have a million things that I will go miles out of my way to avoid. I tend not to tell people what those things are, because it always makes it weird when they know. So I'm not going to tell you guys what those things are. But
I'll tell you mine. It's gum. Don't come anywhere near me with gum. I will. No.
Yeah. But one of Emma's is that she cannot really have anything pointing at her. It terrifies her, and particularly kind of food. And so there's an avocado that she's got in a fruit bowl, and it has to face toward the laundry room. And the avocado moves, and I'll let you guys learn why and how the avocado moves. And she's absolutely obsessed with it, and it's something that runs through it. But I wanted to have fun with it, and I wanted Emma to kind of sort of realize herself, how she gets in her own way. And she has her therapist that's running through her head the whole time as well.
That's right.
Because she sees a therapist back at home, and I had fun with that too, because and that is essentially, I'm going to let you all know, that is essentially free advice. I mean, that is everything that therapist says is something that a therapist has said to me in the past. So I'm giving that to you for free. But I think it is my favorite chapter in a lot of ways, because I love endings, and I just love the way that one ends.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to Claire first, because I think Claire is somebody that I won't speak for you, I'll speak for myself. I think Claire is somebody that I kind of wish I was more like. Claire knows herself really well. Claire isn't afraid to say what she wants or she feels. She knows she wants to, even though if she may never get there, she wants to own a bookshop. She's very free in telling Bennett what she wants and what she needs. And damn, I wish I could be more like that. I'm constantly skirting around issues, and yeah. So let's talk about Claire.
Well, she's a flirt. I mean,
she's a flirt.
She's.
I'm a flirt. I don't know.
You're not a flirt. I don't think you're a flirt.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. Steve's not in the room, but
Steve's not in the room.
no, I mean, I mean that was what she was kind of born out of, and of course I was, before I was cleaning houses, I was tending bar, and so there was a little bit of what I remember from bartending, but not me. I mean, it was more of what I remember the other bartenders that I worked with, what they could do, how they could work a tip.
Yeah.
In ways that I never could, because I was just too shy. So that's kind of, Claire is the embodiment of a lot of the women that I've worked with in restaurants over the years. And I don't think she really has any intentions with Bennett in the beginning. I don't think that she expects him to call. And so when he kind of returns into her life,
and she's okay with that, but
but I think she's sort of thought, okay, great, but she's very well, of course she ends up, as all women do, she's flirts with him, but then of course she ends up being a lot more complicated than that. And I think Bennett, of course, feels let down by that. He thought this was going to be easy. His marriage was absolutely not easy, and he thought, oh great, here's somebody who's going to be fun and easy, and of course she's not. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of her origin story. I have her working in a little bar called the Claret in the book, but it's based on a Soho bar that I absolutely love called the French House. And if any of you ever get a chance to go to London in Soho, go have a drink at the French House. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, it survives all of this madness. It's a tiny, tiny little wine bar. And it's absolutely haunted by all of the old greats of Soho. And Francis Bacon used to drink there. So many of the theater crowd would drink there. I've taken Mom and Dad there. I don't know if you.
It wasn't the one with the wine cellar where we.
Oh no, that was okay. Too, but no, it wasn't that one. But the staff there are so wonderful and familiar for a pub that serves just thousands upon thousands of people in a week. They're so personable, and they know everybody, and I knew exactly where she was. And I think that was part of, and I think I say something to this effect in the book, but sort of Claire is the Claret and the Claret is Claire. They just kind of, they are sort of one.
And last but certainly not least is Kirsty, who is, so unlike either of us. And you touched on this earlier. She was probably the most difficult. Well, I'll ask, was she the most difficult for you to write? Because she is so far beyond our personal experiences.
Actually, no, I don't think so. I think in some ways she might have been a little bit easier, because I think sometimes when you write people that you sort of feel are yourself or someone that you know, you become very critical of how you're portraying them. And
Okay.
well, for me anyway, I sort of felt like with Alicia, when I was seeing parts of myself in both Alicia and Emma, I felt like I was being very hard on them in the same way that I would be hard on myself.
Right.
And I felt like I needed to let up. Whereas with Kirsty, I had nothing but sort of empathy and sympathy for what this woman was going through. And Kirsty's really, she's a woman who is sort of been screwed over by her own generation. You know, she thought that she was doing the right thing by marrying a wealthy man, by having kids, by doing right by her family, by giving up her own dream to support his. And it just all blows up in her face, and she finds herself divorced and rents Bennett's house because she has to leave the town that she's in. Her husband is a celebrity, and she is the one who is blamed, and she has to get out of Dodge, and she ends up in Bennett's house, and because Bennett doesn't follow anything, he doesn't have a TV, he doesn't know anything about this woman's life, he doesn't know who she was married to, and they just kind of strike up this friendship and this sort of shared loneliness and divorce and middle age. And I enjoyed writing her because, and this will sound crazy because I understand that Bennett's not real.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed her so much because she made him happy.
Yeah.
It's really sweet. I know. That sounds like I'm having some sort of passion.
But she does, and she's obviously very different from Claire, but they both fulfill a need.
Yeah.
Of Bennett's that's needed.
Yeah, and they have fun together, and that and that was one of the things that I really enjoyed too. It's just, you know, these are two people who come together and they have fun, and so that means I get to have fun because I get to write a fun scene. Yeah. Whereas, you know, with Alicia and with Emma, there's all this, you know, Bennett has tension with both of them. Yeah. And you know, in different types. With Alicia, he's got kind of a sexual tension, and then with Emma, he's just like, he really can't stand her, and she can't stand him. And so when Kirsty finally comes along, it's like, here he has someone he can have fun with. Yeah.
And so those are the women of, well, those are the four of the women of Superhost. I don't know if we want to talk about Bennett's daughter or not, but
I mean, Bennett's daughter, I mean, I think she's a fairly, you know, minor character, but she's, I mean, it's such a wonderful relationship that they have, and she's really, I mean, she's a huge part of the opening of the book, and Bennett goes to her exhibition, and I won't tell, you know, everybody what happens when he goes to her exhibition, but she's, you know, she's trying to follow in his footsteps, and that was an important thing for me to write as well, because obviously I'm following in my own father's footsteps, and so that was a fun thing to do, is to try to I think they probably have a bit more give and take as a father and daughter relationship. Not that Dad and I don't have a give and take.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
We do, but Dad is just sort of, for the most part, knows what he's doing most of the time. Which I don't think is true of Bennett. So I think Mia has to babysit her father more than I have to babysit mine. Yeah. Fingers crossed, Dad.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, but no, I mean, I think she's a really wonderful character, and I think Bennett would be absolutely lost without her.
Yeah. All right. I think Grace is going to come in here probably in the next 5 minutes. So I think. Like a ton of questions. Well, let's talk about music, because music is, you know, a big part of the book. Bennett becomes obsessed with a rapper by the name of Roots Manuva, who is in fact a real rapper artist in the U.S. Wait, is he based in the U.S. or is he based in the UK?
In the UK.
In the UK, okay. Yeah. Based in the UK, and then of course Emma is borderline obsessed with Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach. Yeah. So music is a big part of this book, but it's also a very big part of your life. So, and I know at least when you're painting or when you're drawing, you listen to music constantly. Do you listen to it when you write? I can't remember.
I do.
Okay.
I have a kind of, but it's like Emma, it's very structured. So I have when I'm painting, I'll listen to anything,
Okay.
except talk radio. I can't do that, but I will, music-wise, I will listen to absolutely anything when I'm painting. And I have big sort of studio playlists that have like 5 or 6 hours worth of music on them. I have probably 15 of those, and whatever I want, whatever I'm thinking that day, I put on a certain one. When I'm writing, I tend to write in about 90-minute to 2-hour sessions. So I have one playlist that's about 2 hours long.
Wow.
And I listen to it every single time.
What's on it?
What's on it? I mean, it's all kind of, it's stuff that I know the words to so well that I can pretty much blank them out. I would be curious if you did one of those word searches of my novels and the words in those songs, like how many of them are like, the lyrics are broken down into
oh yeah
book, no, I mean it's a lot of British sort of pop and folk music that I've been listening. I should probably come up with a list for people of the music that I was listening to when I was writing this book.
Sally hasn't. Hi, Sally. I'm surprised Sally hasn't made. I'm surprised Sally hasn't made you make a novel playlist yet.
But no, I mean, but weirdly, the one thing that I don't listen to is any kind of hip hop, and the reason for that is because the lyrics are just so good that I can't possibly write to anything where the lyrics are really fantastic. But that's kind of I think sort of my first love is music with great lyrics. And so Emily knows that I was the kid on the beach with my headphones on while the rest of the family was reading. Like they were all sitting there with their books like this, and I was lying on my towel with my headphones on, just like being an angsty teenager listening to REM's Night Swimming on repeat. And that was basically my youth. And then, and I think one of the reasons I knew that I was never going to be able to play music. I'm a terrible musician, and I think most of my creations are really just about the angst of not being able to be a musician. and one of the reasons that I started painting was that it was absolutely an excuse to listen to music all day.
Yeah.
And so with writing, I've found that, I've spoken to Dad about this, that the years that I was really, really working on Superhost, so 2016, 2017, when I was really intensely writing it, I bought almost no music. And I look back into my iTunes, and there's almost nothing new there.
Because I rely on you for.
I know, and you probably
you are my music guru. Yeah.
Because I just wasn't buying anything new because I was spending so much less time listening to new stuff. And so now I find that I actually have to schedule it, like make sure that I'm listening to. I've got, if anybody's interested, BBC Six Music in London. You can stream it through your computer, and that's what I listen to. And they have a bunch of different DJs, and they're all wonderful, and they all have different tastes, so you can sort of pick and choose. And I've got a few shows that I love a lot. One DJ, Giles Peterson, is absolutely fantastic. If people want to look him up, he just plays such a wonderful range of music. Lauren Laverne, Tom Ravenscroft, but they're all wonderful kind of iconic British DJs that have sort of 2-3 hour slots every week. And I just listen to those shows, and I find new music, and I listen to it in the studio, and it almost always ends up influencing my writing later on. And that's how Roots Manuva came into my life, and that's actually how this Philip Glass song came into my life as well. I've always kind of liked Philip Glass whenever I've heard him, but he's certainly in that kind of genre of music, classical music, that I just don't really know anything about. And then I heard this one piece of music, and honestly, guys, if you've never heard this, it's Philip Glass, Einstein on the Beach, which is like a 5-hour opera. And I'm not suggesting that you listen to the whole 5-hour opera. But there's one piece in it called Knee Play Number 5. It's about 5 minutes long, and it is just the most gorgeous piece of music. And Emma is obsessed with the repetition in it. But there's a wonderful bit, like sort of minute at the end of the song, about love, and that I use to sort of relate to her relationship with her husband. And it is like, it's just an absolutely stunning piece of music that's somewhere between music and art and experience.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to listen to it because even though I read the book, I still don't know the piece. Oh, there she is. She's gonna cut me off.
I am. I wouldn't have, but we have a ton of audience questions, and
Let's do it.
Let's dive in. Yeah, just get all ready for it. So we have a few that are kind of similar. So if everyone's okay with it, I'm kind of gonna lump in together, and if you need a refresher, let me know. But we were just talking about you painting all day because you could listen to music. Jennifer wanted to know, does Kate's painting process inform her writing process or the other way around?
I like to think that they inform each other. The one thing that's different is that writing takes up, I think, more of my brain. So one of the things that I've been able to do when I paint, so a lot of my paintings are very pattern based. So there's a process at the beginning that involves working out the palette and working out the pattern. And once I've done that, all I have to do is kind of execute it. And that's basically every day, sort of 3 or 4 hours of fairly monotonous work once I've worked out the pattern and the color. So I end up using that time to write in my head and sort of rely on my memory for the next day when I get home, whenever I'm next writing, to sit down and actually try to recreate what I thought about while I was painting. And so I think the music does play into that as well. You know, whatever I'm listening to that day, I'm sure seeps into whatever I'm writing or whatever I'm thinking about when I'm painting, because music is just so emotive that you're always going to be putting those emotions into things. So usually what happens is I write in the morning and then I paint in the afternoon. So when I'm painting in the afternoon, I tend to be thinking about what I'm going to be writing the next morning. Yeah.
Do you ever find that they kind of bleed into each other? Do you read something and think about painting? Do you write something, paint something and think about how that would be a story, or see a painting and think that way?
Yeah, I think well, one of the things that happened with this book, with Superhost, is Bennett's figure painting was sort of born out of the idea. So I'm doing a series of paintings. I'll try not to describe this too much because it's fairly abstract, but I use the palettes of historical painters. So what that involves is I look at a lot of historical paintings and I try to match the colors, and then I use them in an abstract way. And a lot of these paintings are very specifically based on the male gaze toward women. And so I was looking at paintings of naked women basically all the time and using the palettes from them. And so I think that very much seeped into the kind of painter Bennett became. He started, and some of those painters, if you're interested, are Walter Sickert, Edward Vuillard, a lot of the sort of later Impressionists, and how they sort of depicted the kind of everyday life. It was like supposed to be the everyday life of women, except in a lot of ways it so clearly wasn't, because they were still very kind of idealized and objectified.
While we're on the topic of Bennett, Catherine wanted to know about your decision to make your protagonist male when the book was inspired by your own experiences, which you touched on right at the beginning. But aside from your decision about a plot perspective, did it help to distance yourself from him and make it into a more fictional narrative, or was that not part of your thought process while you were doing it?
I think it's one of those things where I sort of feel like I'm sort of trying to justify the choice of Bennett. And I understand why, because it is an odd one, but he didn't really feel hugely like a choice at the time. He just kind of appeared in my brain and wouldn't go away. And maybe that was, in a way, a kind of me distancing myself from, from writing about, a novel that's essentially kind of bordering on a memoir, which I wouldn't have wanted to do. So I think there is probably a bit of that in there. But I've also, I think Bennett reminds me of a lot of the men in my life, which I think is probably why I love him so much.
In speaking kind of about how you came to Bennett, let's talk about how you came to the plot. Jean wanted to know if you could talk about how you worked on the structure. Did it evolve organically? Did you devise the plot outline? No, back to front, kind of pants your seat, write it.
Yeah, I think I knew pretty early on that I wanted to go from the perspective of going back and forth between the hosts and the guests.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the beginning, I had more of an idea that I wanted it to be kind of a novel of short stories, because I always loved those, and I love that format. I love Winesburg, Ohio. I love Olive Kittredge. Anything that sort of works on that idea of sort of a bunch of short stories coming together to create a novel. But then it ended up being sort of much more of a novel. You do change perspectives. But it really is more chapter based than it is short story based in the end. But that was the idea. I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to go back and forth between Bennett and his guests. And then really the big question was how many. I think in the beginning I thought there was going to be about 5 or 6 guests, and then I got so into the 3 that were in there, and wrote much longer chapters than I was anticipating. And so there were a couple of characters that I had sketched out that didn't make it in the end. And I think they actually kind of blended in. I think Emma ended up kind of being the amalgamation of 2 or 3 people, and Kirsty as well.
You're like setting me up for the perfect segues here, so I'm just going to keep rolling with it. I know you're crushing it. I'm actually going to kind of combine 2 questions here. MJ wanted to know if you saw London as being primarily the setting of the book, or is it one of the characters? And then Alex wanted to know if there was a detachment between writing in the UK versus writing in the States, since you have such a personal connection to London.
Yeah. I think, is it the setting or is it a character? I think ultimately it's the setting. I think so, but I can see it tipping slightly into the character camp because of my own kind of Anglophile relationship to the city. So I think Americans who are obsessed with London are really obsessed with London, and I'm sure I'm in that camp. I want to say that I'm a Londoner because I lived there for so long, but I'm not. I'm a crazy Anglophile with a London obsession. And
I would have answered that. Oh, it's absolutely a character. Like, what are you talking about? Like, no, yours is a better answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
we're just obsessed.
But there are moments where, I mean, and it's such an Anglophile thing to do where, I know my way around that city in a kind of, again, here's me being obsessive again, but in a really obsessive way. I know street names. I know where to turn. I know which tube stop you need to get off at. I have there's this thing that cab drivers do in London called the knowledge. And basically that's why cab drivers in London are better than anywhere else in the world, is that they have to basically do like a 3 or 4 year course on how to get around the city. And they have to know every street name, and they have to know where every ATM machine is. And they can get you, and you just tell them where you want to go. And they don't need sat nav, they don't need anything. They just get you there. They're not even supposed to ask you how to get there. You go. Sometimes they'll ask you your preferred route. And I've always kind of, I'm like, I really want to take, I mean, I hate driving, but I really want to take, I'm just like, I want to pass the knowledge, and I have that kind of geekiness to me about getting around that city. So yeah, it probably is a bit more of a character than it is the setting, now that I'm talking myself out of my original answer. But what was the second question again?
Was there a detachment between writing in the UK versus writing in the States? I think your dates were 2016, so were you here for most of it?
I wrote most of it here. The funny thing is that, well, I started writing it over there. I think I wrote the first chapter over there, and then came back and wrote the rest of it entirely here. And one of the things that we did is, so the book takes place, Bennett's house is in a neighborhood called Bedford Park, which is part of Chiswick, which is West London, and Chiswick is where my husband grew up. So I sort of knew that I wanted it to be in that area. I wanted it to be in an area where houses, number one, they tend to be quite large, and they tend to be sort of at least semi-detached, if not detached, and have these kind of big gardens that you could have. Every house in West London, it feels to me, has a kind of a studio or an office out in the back garden. So one of the things that we did early on when we landed, and I knew that I was going to be working on this book, was we just really walked around the neighborhood. And one of my husband's best friends grew up there. And so he showed me where Jonathan's house was. And we sort of walked these poor people who lived there, because we were just sort of walked all around it. And I said, yep, this is Bennett's house. This is Bennett's house. And I sort of took it back with me. And it was absolutely perfect way to be in London in my mind when I was here. And I wish that I'm working on something now that takes place in Maine. And I just keep saying to my husband, I really wish I was writing another London novel, because then at least I'd have somewhere else to go every day. I wasn't anticipating writing in a pandemic. And so now I'm stuck where I am all the time. So I was like, oh crap, I should be writing something else about London. So yeah, but no, I think there is, I don't know how it would have been different if I'd been writing it mostly in London, but I know Nicole and I, my agent, who is British, we worked, and my husband, we all sort of worked on the dialogue together because I hadn't been there. And so there were certain things that, we all sort of say, now what, did I say that right? Or do I need to change? There was some point I say diapers and it needed to be nappies. And so we kind of all, we all collectively pitched in.
I remember putting that note in the manuscript just for reference. So we have kind of a good confluence of questions here. Brock wanted to know, were there novels you were thinking of when you wrote Superhost? Any models, inspirations, anti-inspirations? Mm-hmm. And Cassandra also asked, did you read other books to help inspire, or the opposite, steering clear to avoid feeling influenced?
Well, I mean, in the sense that you just, you should always be reading. I think that, that certainly I was, but could I tell you what exactly I was reading while I was writing this? Probably not. But I mean, probably one of the huge influences for me on this was Nick Hornby. I've just always been a huge fan of him, and I'm so thankful and grateful to him because, and Emily and I sort of touched on this in our conversation, but I'm not a natural reader. And I never was growing up, but, I was the kid with my headphones on. So when I found Nick Hornby when I was maybe like 17, 18 years old, and I realized that people could write about the things that I was really into, in terms of music and kind of love and relationships, but not romance, I mean, and he was, he was writing about culture. He was writing, you sit in English class in high school reading all these books about, the 1800s or whatever. And here I pick up Nick Hornby, and it's like, oh, you mean you can write a book about a character who's in love with Kurt Cobain? I didn't know you could do that. And that really opened a lot of doors for me, in terms of being a reader. And then, of course, the other huge love of my life is Shirley Jackson. And I don't think she's in this book at all, but maybe, maybe one day she'll creep her way into my writing.
The next book.
Yeah.
In Maine. Shirley Jackson in Maine.
Someday somebody's going to review my book and say, this is Shirley Jackson meets Nick Hornby. And I'm thank you very much.
It seems like the perfect combo. Exactly. So you mentioned earlier that you didn't really broadcast that you were ever writing. So who read your early drafts? You mentioned Tom and Jonathan being kind of the research team in a lot of ways, and talking about the dialogue. And then Jean wanted to know if you ever asked your father to read your work in progress, and how much advice does he give or do you take?
Well, I think you should see the green pen. No, he read, so I think I was about 3 chapters into Superhost before I finally fessed up and gave it to him, because I realized that I was getting really, really committed to it, and was going to be kind of heartbroken if nothing happened to it. So I decided, so 3 chapters, that means about 120 pages for this book. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to send it to him. And God knows, I mean, he's probably out there laughing, what he thought when I sent it to him, because it was really, it could not have been more out of the blue. It was like just an email that was like, here's the first 3 chapters of the novel you had no idea I was writing. But bless him, he wrote back and was just like, great, I'll read it, and didn't sort of, didn't really balk at it, which was wonderful. And And so I got a lot of, basically he didn't give me a lot of notes except to just keep writing it. But of course, when it was done, he was the first, he and my husband and soon after my mom, and then soon after you, ma'am, you know, we're the first readers on it. You know, I mean, it's, what does Nicole call us? She calls us the family committee or something like that. But basically, like, you know, Russo's work by committee. So everybody was involved.
Okay, I have two more questions. One from Sally. Colors play such a role throughout the story. Did you see the colors as you were writing each section?
Yes, absolutely. But Sally, you played such a role in that because we had so many conversations about yellow. And I love the yellow in this book, on this book cover. It's kind of like a yellowy orange. We could have a debate about whether that's yellow or orange. So for everybody else, my training, my MFA is in color theory. So I think a lot about color, and that's kind of my day job, bread and butter. And there's one sort of where in Bennett's chapters where he's talking about yellow, and he's trying to emulate a sweater that Alicia was wearing, and he really liked the yellow and he wants to use the yellow in his painting. And I think I sort of compare it to like a combination of like Coleman's mustard and a certain brand of butter, and there was another yellow thing, maybe a banana or something like that, but sort of yellow things that we all know. And I was trying to I was basically mixing the color in my mind, which of course I can do because I do that all the time. But I wonder, you know, but I had so much fun writing it because I think it's the way my brain works that I'm constantly thinking about color. And I had a painting professor who said to me, she said, you know, you're a painter when you can tell that one traffic light is greener than the next. And I sort of feel like that's the relationship that painting and writing share, is that just like really extreme attention to detail, that you can just spot these little minutiae. And so I had fun putting that knowledge into the book.
Perfect. Sally also let us know that it's the family trust, which is
it's the family trust.
It's the t-shirts you were all gonna now get, because I have to put that on a t-shirt, obviously.
Who let us down making the t-shirt?
Oh, man. All right, final question, and this is a question that we kind of always ask, but now the pandemic has been going on for so long, it's just like, what was your favorite read of the last year? But what's your favorite pandemic read?
Ooh, what is my favorite pandemic read? I have to think, because there have been so many. I just finished Luster, which blew me away, and I'm really excited about because it's really, really hard to write about painters, and I just feel a kinship with her. Like there's so much that she talks about with painting where I'm just like, oh my gosh, she's got that perfectly, and particularly the female relationship to painting. So I'm kind of behind. I've only just finished that book, and I realize a lot of you have probably already read it because I'm behind the 8 ball. But if not, read that book. I really loved that one a lot. What's another one that I've absolutely loved? Well, I did Things in Jars for you guys for my kind of hindsight book, which is a fabulous kind of London. It's kind of a mystery. I guess there's a mystery to it, but it's historical fiction, and it's sort of you're kind of looking for a missing girl who might be a mermaid. And I know that sounds like a little bit fantastical, and I don't ever read fantasy, and I absolutely adore this book. The characters are fabulous, and if you, like me, love wandering around London like a geek in books, it's perfect for you.
Fantastic. That was our last question. Thank you both so much for this event tonight. We have copies of Superhost. I included the link to the sign page. If you'd like a signature personalization, let us know. And congratulations on publication.
Thank you. And thank you everybody so much for coming. Really, honestly, it's wonderful to have you here.
All righty. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.